Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is fiction writer Kevin Wilson, who began his career with a volume of short stories, Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, which certainly pushed the boundaries of what we might call realistic fiction. Then his first novel, The Family Fang, told of the exploits of a family of performance artists. They caused chaos and perhaps art on land and in the air. His latest novel, A Perfect Little World, is the story of an experiment in child rearing. Please join me here at the Alabama Booksmith as we talk with writer Kevin Wilson. Kevin Wilson, it's nice to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. I read Tunneling to the Center of the Earth and then The Family Fang, and I giggled, laughed. I was delighted throughout both of them.
Oh, that's very
I
kind.
have to confess, when I picked up the third book, I thought, more laughs. But it's not true.
No.
You change direction in the second novel. It's not a grim book, not at all. But it is a book with serious concerns, with a comic gift that you do have. Mm-hmm. What was it like to kind of turn your back on it and move in a different direction? Why'd you do that?
Well, I think one of the things that I've always tried to focus on in my writing is lightness, to be kind of silly sometimes. And I think that silliness lets me kind of slowly dig into something darker, but it happens by small degrees, so the reader doesn't quite understand how sad the story is becoming. But I also felt like sometimes I use humor as a crutch, because I don't trust sometimes in my ability to tell the story without humor. And so with this story, when I started to write it, I thought, I don't know that I need as much silliness as the previous books. I wanted to see what I could do if I was kind of more straightforward with it. And again, like with every book, you know that you're relying on certain things that you've always done, but you want to push yourself to do something new. Mm-hmm. So I tried it, and it was scary.
Well, it is about being a parent. It's about raising children, which is the scariest thing any of us will ever do.
I think so.
It's an experiment in child rearing.
Right.
It is also, although the characters debate this back and forth, it is also a kind of commune. It is also not a cult, but a kind of a commune, yes, edging towards cult once in a while. Did you mess around studying 19th century, 18th century utopian communities? Who did you look at?
So I did absolutely no research. There's a quote by E.L. Doctorow, which is, "I do as little research as necessary to write the book." So I looked at some things, but I didn't want it to pull me into this kind of rabbit hole. So I looked at intentional communities and I looked at communes just to get a sense of how previous ones had worked, get a sense of when they started to fall apart. But for the most part, I wanted it to be entirely its own thing. And because everyone was so concerned in the book that it's not a commune, I wanted to figure out ways that I could kind of push it away from some of those concerns.
It is. Well, you describe it. You have this enterprise, the project.
Yeah, so it's a project where this child psychologist decides, hey, we'll take these 10 children, these 10 families, and we'll raise the children collectively so that the children have not 2 parents, but 20 parents.
Right.
And just to see what happens if you feel that spirit of community, that you're not solely responsible for the life of your child, you have all these people helping you. And so just like anything, it's a strange enterprise, but the hope is that these children will be more well-rounded, more loved, and the parents will feel this greater sense of connection to the larger world.
Not only would the children have 9 siblings each,
right,
but they would all be the same age.
Right. Now,
there are lots of families in the Appalachians and in Ireland where there are 9 children.
Yes.
And they're maybe almost all the same age, but not literally the same age.
Right.
Does that makes a huge difference in your thinking, right?
Yeah, it creates a stranger family dynamic. And that's the thing, is that as much as they want to make this a real, genuine family, there are all of these artificial parts of it that are going to make it slightly strange. And especially to anyone on the outside, they're going to say, this is bizarre. Why are you doing this?
They are isolated. They have a 450 acres. Is that right?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
And buildings where they all live.
Right.
This is all paid for by a benefactress. She reminded me of somebody. Is she based on somebody?
No, I just thought I just needed a crazy billionaire. I felt like it was time for me to tell a story that had a crazy billionaire in it. And so I just kind of started to build from these pieces of, and I thought a lot about the Walton family with Walmart, their devotion to the arts and things like that, that there are these interests that move beyond just pure retail. Right. And so maybe they would want to fund something.
Well,
it
like
is
this. A mega store.
Right.
It is a mega store family fortune.
Exactly.
So that is a person of whom I was reminded.
Yes.
Like with Crystal Bridges.
Right, exactly.
Up in Bentonville. She's an interesting woman. If I heard, I don't think that she's particularly odd. I thought she was awfully nice.
She is very kind, but I just think anytime you give a lot of money to create some strange family, there's something odd going on. And she kind of came about too because my friend Ann Patchett, I was telling her about the idea for the book, and she said, this is something a friend of mine was telling me about, these orphanages where people weren't, their parents hadn't died, but had simply given them up.
Right.
And she was like, you should look into that as something for the book. And so I thought, I'll have this character who has experienced this kind of larger familial unit that people might think is strange, but to her makes perfect sense.
There is a psychologist, and, when an author names a protagonist, Fielding has a character named Squire Allworthy, and everybody knows that's a good person.
Yes.
There's a Nurse Ratched.
Yes.
In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes.
You have a Dr. Grind. What do you mean how do you mean the reader to respond to a character named Grind?
Well, I thought in my head I just liked the sound of the word, but it was also the sense that the doctor, although he is a kind, generous person, has internally all of this kind of anxiety and all of this stress from his upbringing. And so when I thought of Grind, I thought of he's a person who's just constantly grinding his teeth, like trying to hold everything together. So I was like, Grind. And then also his late son is named Jody Grind, which was a band in Atlanta that my wife really loved. And I was like, I'm going to put Jody Grind in there.
Well, that's one of the prerogatives of writers is naming characters after their friends.
I try to slide anything I can into it.
I know, people do. Dr. Grind was himself the subject of a child rearing experiment. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, it's his two parents raised him using what they invented called the constant friction method, which is this idea that you're not supposed to coddle your children, you're supposed to prepare them for the kind of awfulness of the world. And so by doing that, you're constantly creating uncomfortable situations for them so that they'll adapt, and so that anytime in the real world they encounter something strange, they're able to move forward without it affecting them. And of course, like all good intentions, it leaves him kind of damaged and scarred.
He has a dog.
Yes.
Named Huck.
Yes.
I can put up with a lot of foolishness in novels, but I cannot put up with cruelty to dogs.
That's right.
What?
Yeah, they bring him a dog, and then they take it away almost immediately, and he never knows what happens to it. Just to give him the joy of having a pet and then making him deal with the loss of the pet.
Well, that should have prepared him for a lifetime of disappointment.
I guess so.
And it sort of does. He has great equanimity, but he also has trouble with his emotions, I think. One of the experiments, not a 19th century, not Shakers, and not communes in California either, but one of the experiments that comes closest to your line of thinking is B.F. Skinner's Walden 2.
Oh, yes.
Skinner, of course, was the most famous manipulator of childhood experience, of infant experience ever in American psychology. And then his book is about a Skinnerian utopia Is he in your thinking?
I mean, in brief readings about kind of psychologists that sought to create some sort of artificial or strange world, I looked at it. But again, I tried to make it wholly out of my own brain.
Sure.
But yeah, that was certainly something that I thought about. And this idea of this psychologist that wants to do good, but always in the back of their mind, there's this worry that, am I making things worse? And I think that isn't just science, that's, I think, parenting, is this idea that no matter what you do, you're constantly worrying that you've done the wrong thing.
You never know how it's going to work out.
Exactly.
Maybe I should restrain myself before I ask you this, but I won't.
Okay.
The heart of all child rearing is nature versus nurture. E.O. Wilson is a frequent guest on this show.
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
And he has been promoting the notion of various inherited characteristics, all of his scientific life. Do you feel that your novel in any way answers the question of are we the product of nature and our genes, or of method and how we're raised? How do you feel about that?
I think that no matter what you do, no matter what circumstances you set up
Yeah.
in order to raise or affect change upon a person, there are these unknown quantities that are inside of us that are going to resist that. And I think that's the danger, is to believe that anything has a fixed identity. And in trying to kind of push them into that, there will be these parts of themselves that will make themselves known whether you like it or not. I think about my mom. My grandfather left my mom's family when she was very young, and I didn't know him very well, but my mom says there are mannerisms, just the way that I sit, that instantly reminds her of her dad. And I think, well, that's some part of me that I've carried, that's been carried through all these generations, that I can't account for.
Yeah. Well, when you read a biography of Mozart or a biography of Picasso, you get much the same kind of thing. I mean, they hardly had a chance to learn anything. I mean, it must have been present from the very first division of cells, right from the start. There are rules in this perfect place. There are rules. What are some of the rules?
Well, I mean, there's this idea that you're raising the children communally, so you have to think of each child as your own. And that's difficult because you know inherently that you gave birth to this one specific child. And so there's this weird kind of logic going on in your brain as a parent where you have to pretend that they're not, that all of them are yours. And Dr. Grein has these ideas that, like, as much as the children are together and raised communally, the parents are fixed. You don't want to mess up the arrangement of these families, which is basically to say he doesn't want them sleeping with each other.
There is no Eden without a serpent.
Yes.
And the serpent in this case is perhaps human sexuality?
Yeah, and I think it's just this idea that no matter how much you believe that you connect with all these other people, there are things that are going to pull you away from them. I think that's, anytime you're closely connected, there are going to be things also that push you away. And so there is something unnatural about living with these other strangers and thinking of them as your family.
Well, the 10 children don't know anything else.
Right.
The 19 adults do.
Right.
They were all adults.
Right.
When they got there.
Yeah. And that's one of the research assistants says, the children will be fine. It's the parents you have to worry about. And I think that is true, that even with raising our children, is the children are wonderful and strange and beautiful, and we're the ones that are pulling all this baggage into the raising of them.
Izzy is I guess she is the protagonist of your novel. She's the central character, and she is a single mom because the father of her boy is dead. It pleased you to have a protagonist different from the other 18 people.
Yeah, I mean, I focused on her because I knew that I wanted someone that was special even within this strange community. And the book itself generated from just a strange idea that I had. I couldn't get out of my head, and I thought, there's this young woman, she's pregnant, and she has no one to help her. And I kept figuring out all these different ways that I could walk her through a life. And I just couldn't leave it alone. This character just kept solidifying in my mind until I thought, this experiment will be the thing.
Are you a fan of barbecue? Are you
Yes.
one of the Southerners who's mad for barbecue?
I am. I'm a huge barbecue fan. I think about it constantly. And my wife and I, before we had children, would make trips to Kansas City or to Lockhart, Texas, just to eat barbecue and then come back home. I think it's one of the most perfect foods in the world.
Izzy apprentices to a master and then becomes herself
Yes.
a master pig smoker, puller, chopper.
Yeah. There's something, my dad is incredible at barbecue, and I feel like there's something innate in that ability, because when I try, it never comes out the way that it's supposed to. I think there's something mystical about the way that you control the temperature, the smoke, the meat, so that when I eat it, I feel like some sort of miracle has occurred.
Well, Mr. Tannehill is if he were Chinese or Indian, he'd be some sort of guru.
Yes. He does have some sort of innate understanding of how these things work.
Izzy becomes then a master of the art herself. Fine. But there's also art. Your subject in all three books is art. Izzy's the father of Cap.
Yes.
His father was an artist. Then Izzy discovers that she is something of an artist. And she has a brief fling with David, who is an art student artist, and so on. You've been exploring in all three books. In the Family Fang, I'd like to go there just for a bit. I mean, you what you're doing is poking around, discussing and exploring what art is.
Right.
What is it? Does it have to be spontaneous?
You're asking the wrong person, I think, because I have a pretty broad view of what art is. I think that anything where a person has the intention of creating art, of an artistic enterprise, that is art, whether people think it is or not. And the reason that I think this is when I was a kid growing up in Winchester, Tennessee, there were no museums for me to visit. There was very little, I couldn't see movies or see music. And I read this article about Chris Burden, the artist, the performance artist, and he at one point had someone shoot him in the arm with a rifle, and that was his piece. And people were saying in the article, "Isn't this ridiculous? This is not art." And as a 15-year-old kid, I thought, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of, because my own life, this meaningless, tiny little life in this nowhere town, if I thought of my life as an artistic enterprise, it would become one. And so it was really heartening to me. So in my books, I'm exploring that. What is art? How does art become art? But also just what is the function of it?
But Mr. Fang, in the Family Fang, rejects 2,000 years, all the way back to the cave walls in France. He rejects all art except the absolutely brand new spontaneous moment.
Right.
He's wrong, so to speak.
I think he is, yeah. I mean, I don't agree with him, but I can understand why he thinks that, because he wants to believe that his work is the most important work that exists, and in order to do that, you have to negate. But he's completely wrong.
So describe David's art and Izzy's art.
Yeah.
And their art, too.
Right.
You think?
Yeah, I think that's
David's is what?
It's David builds. He makes these ceramic vases, these beautiful vases, and then he smashes them, and then he glues them back together.
Yes.
And he videotapes himself smashing it. To me, that I wrote it because I thought, that seems like art to me. It seems like a good piece of art.
And Izzy's is derivative, in a completely derivative. I guess I gave myself away.
Yeah.
But she cuts out the letters that make sentences from a Faulkner story. The Rose for Emily to begin with.
Yeah.
So explain that to me.
Well, it's just this idea that if stories are made up of words, what happens when you make each word solid, real, tangible? What happens to a story when it's no longer on the page but actually in front of you and you can touch it? And to me, I find that to be very interesting. I think that language takes on different ideas when it's heard, when it's spoken aloud, as opposed to when it's read on the page, and also when you handle it.
So if Mr. Fang, what's his name? What was his name? Not
Caleb.
Boris. Caleb.
Yeah.
Caleb has the narrowest possible
Right.
vision of art. You apparently have the broadest possible. Anything not art?
If somebody tells me it's art, I'll take them at their word,
Okay.
and then I'll work with it under those parameters. Yeah.
Religion.
Mm-hmm.
You have a project, which is in some ways a commune, but is not a cult. And one
Right.
of the things that's along with presumably outlawing adultery, presumably they've
Yeah.
outlawed religion and talk of heaven.
Right.
Why is that important?
Well, I just felt like it was important for the study, and it's one of those imperfect ways that they move forward, which is, how do we handle this? We don't know. There are so many people to keep track of. We're going to just say we don't talk about it, and it's something that they can come to later. It's one of those things where, again, science is trying to kind of control how things work, and yet I think everybody knows that children have some sense of what happens to us when we die, what comes after that, and so it's one of the limitations of the project.
They bring in some tetras,
Yes.
some fish,
Yes.
which inevitably die.
Right. And they use that as a lesson to teach the children about death and the universality of death.
It does. I mean, one of the things that children are, no matter how you shelter them, they are going to learn about death.
Yeah.
Something around them is going to die, even if it's a plant.
Right.
It's going to die. You, in the course of this is, of course, a kind of experiment in child rearing.
Right.
And they're taking notes, very
Yes,
careful, extensive notes. But they bring into the project one of the oldest and most famous experiments in all of child rearing,
Yes.
which is the marshmallow
Yes.
test. Why do you do it? And what did we learn in this novel about the marshmallow? The Stanford, is
Yeah,
it? The Stanford marshmallow
it's
test.
this idea that if you have a marshmallow with the child in a room, you say, you can eat this now, or you can
Right.
wait 2 minutes and you'll get a second marshmallow. And
Yes.
it's the test in some ways showed that children that could wait would have a more fulfilling life later on, that they'd be able to have patience. And so when I thought about that, when I first read about it and we had kids, I thought to myself, Griffin Patch would eat that marshmallow in 1 second.
Yes.
I have no doubt in my mind. And then I thought, does that mean they're ruined? Does that mean their life will never be fulfilling? Do I need to train them to not eat the marshmallow? And so in the book, what I tried to figure out was, what are the ways that this test could be flawed? How could it be that children might not even believe that it's necessary to wait?
But they don't. The first time through, they all eat the marshmallow.
Exactly, yeah.
But then Dr. Grind kind of buries that,
Right.
the results of that
Yeah,
experiment.
it's not they're not great results for what he's trying to do.
Because he thinks, as we conventionally think, that the child who has forbearance is going to ultimately be more successful in life.
Right.
So a couple of years later, they do it again.
Right.
But the results are no better.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things too. When you want an outcome, you'll do everything you can to make that outcome happen, and I think the world resists that. At least I've found that the world resists what you want.
The marshmallow test in your novel reminded me of some of the odd outcomes from IQ and achievement tests as well. That is, a very, very smart fellow taking the test sees that none of the answers is absolutely, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
Like you can look, is it A, B, C, or D? And if you know too much, you can say, well, none of those is really perfectly right.
Right. Yeah, I'm finding that when we do
Yeah.
homework, I'll look at questions that he has, and I'm like, what the heck is the answer supposed to be? I have no idea myself.
Right.
And Griff goes through all the possibilities, and we're still just stuck. So
Right.
I think those ideas where you have a planned outcome are problematic.
Well, what I meant, I was being obtuse there. And no, it was my fault. It was the reasons that the children gave for not
Oh, I
waiting
see.
that I
Yeah.
thought, of course. One kid says, well, I know you're going to give me another one anyway.
Right.
And another one says, well, I don't really like marshmallows.
Exactly.
Anyway. Suddenly there's this array of answers that have nothing to do with
Right.
patience.
That confound the expectation of why
Yes,
they would
yes,
wait.
yes,
Exactly.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you have a very, very funny book of stories. I think hysterical novel and an extremely thoughtful book
Oh, thank
in perfect. It's the womb, perfect little place.
Exactly.
And now you will go on. What will your fourth book be?
I have a book of stories that'll come out next year, so new, all of them, and things I've been working on over the past few years. And then I've got a little idea for a novel about weird kids, and I'll see where that goes.
Would you characterize the stories as like tunneling in the sense that they are pushers of realistic boundaries, or would you characterize them as more conventional or science fiction, or what?
It's a weird thing that's happened with my stories. When I first started writing stories, the world was really, really strange and the people were normal. So it was people reacting to the strangeness of the world.
Okay.
And as I've gotten older, I just feel like the world's not that strange. Like, it's actually kind of boring, and the real weirdness is inside of us. So these stories are about incredibly weird people trying to navigate a normal, boring world. So I've completely flip-flopped.
Well, this normal, boring world will bite you once in a while.
Once in a while, yes.
It's not all that predictable, but you do generate some really fantastic characters.
Oh, thank you.
Right, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one, and when you write it, let's sit down again and talk again.
Oh, I would love that.
Thank you.
Thank you.